Today, I want to talk about a very controversial and tricky subject, responsibility of fast fashion brands. Why is the subject tricky? Well, because yes, it is clear that fast fashion brands, they have a responsibility. But the question is, what kind of responsibility? To what extent and where do we draw the lines? What are the limits of this responsibility? Are we talking about a civil liability, tax liability, or even a criminal responsibility? Or is it just a moral, ethical question that we are talking about? This video will be dedicated to this very question, in which I will help you understand why fast fashion brands are responsible and what is happening on this very subject in countries like France, Sweden, UK, and Switzerland. Hello everyone, this is Esel Sorbekova and welcome to my channel where I help you understand matters of fast fashion and sustainable development the legal way. So this channel is all things fast fashion and fashion, where I attempt to explain you issues of labor rights in the fast fashion industry. So without further ado, let's get it started. Let's talk about the responsibility of local businesses versus fast fashion brands businesses, which are, in other words, foreign companies. So what about the responsibility of local fast fashion brands that do not produce for other countries other than producing for people in their country? What I mean is, for example, what about a company, a cloth company that produces in Bangladesh only for Bangladeshi people so that it does not export these clothes outside its territory? There is a general understanding that local businesses, and by local I mean garment factories, as we are specifically talking about the fast fashion industry, when they underpay their workers or simply, generally speaking, they violate workers' rights, they just tend to get away with it because whatever happens inside stays inside. And in 99% of the cases, local companies do not get exposed to the world if their businesses do not mix and mingle with foreign companies. What I mean is, we hear about violations of human rights, violations of workers' rights abroad when we are located in countries of the developed world, only if these things get associated with businesses of foreign companies, foreign international companies, and international brands. What about the responsibility of fast fashion brands? Certainly, fast fashion brands, they have responsibility. The responsibility is for doing business with companies in the developing countries that have entered into unsustainable, unethical, and often unlawful business practices. In the fast fashion industry, the classical example is when a fashion brand outsources, that is, buys ready-made garments from factories located abroad that they do not own. That is why their responsibility is linked to doing business with these companies that either belong to local owners, for example, Bangladeshi nationals, or foreign investors, for example, the Chinese, the Japanese, and other, foreign investors that come to invest in countries like Bangladesh, Ethiopia, etc. Again, we are talking about a classical scenario because in 99.9% of the cases, fast fashion brands, they do not own factories. Now we're coming to the tricky part of the question. So if they have the responsibility, what kind of responsibility are we talking about? And what to do with it if they have it? Like, what are the limits of it? And what does it actually mean? How is this responsibility realized? I hate to break it to you, but unfortunately, today, responsibility of fast fashion brands does not mean anything tangible other than demanding from them a corporate social responsibility, public shaming before their customers, and the obligation of reporting of their production or outsourcing activities. What has been done at the level of both national and international platforms when it comes to the responsibility of international brands in terms of workers' rights, specifically when it comes to the payment of their salaries, because their salaries of garment workers are one of the lowest in the world, and this is a huge problem. A corporate social responsibility is defined by the European Commission, for example, as companies taking responsibility for their impact on society. And it is an increasingly important issue on the international agenda when it comes to activities of foreign companies, multinational enterprises, uh, fashion brands, you name it, their activities at the foreign soil. And at the level of the United Nations, there are increasingly many international documents that call for responsibility of international companies towards their activities that affect human rights and the environmental pollution. As for national laws, there are also some advancements in this regard. For example, in France, UK, Switzerland, and Sweden, where specifically in Sweden, talks are underway. Switzerland has lost its referendum on responsible business initiative. UK and France, they have laws that are in the field of the activities, regulation of activities of foreign companies. We'll see each of them a little bit more in detail. Now let's talk about what is actually happening in Switzerland. On the 29th of November 2020, so that is exactly 1 week ago, the Swiss population voted in the federal referendum with respect to the Responsible Business Initiative. Unfortunately, and to the greatest lack of Swiss world giant companies, I mean, you name it, one of them is Nestle, the initiative did not get through. If this initiative had been successful, the Swiss-based firms would have had to prove that they had taken due care to prevent abusive labor conditions and environmental damage in their own operations and supply chains abroad. If they failed to do so, individuals or organizations could sue Swiss companies for abuses before Swiss courts for abuses that actually happened abroad. However, a law will be drafted within 2 years, which will more or less reflect the French due diligence law and will address corporate social responsibility of Swiss firms. So that means that we will yet have to see how this will play out, how the question of responsibility of Swiss firms will be addressed further as time goes by. Now let's talk about France. The French due diligence law of the 27th March of 2017 requires companies to establish and effectively implement due diligence measures to identify and prevent violations of fundamental human rights and liberties and causing environmental damage. So this whole thing would be in connection with their operations abroad. So basically, this law is about reporting obligation. Unfortunately, this law does not really cover the current problems of the fast fashion industry regarding low payments of salaries or violations of labor rights. Because, as I said, the law covers violations of human rights of the fundamental nature and fundamental human liberties. Because at the end of the day, labor rights remain labor rights, except for child labor and forced labor, which find their support in human rights instruments, so they become fundamental human liberties and values. So these two things are set aside. The law actually does not deal in any way with the lowest salaries, which actually is one of the number one issues in the fast fashion industry. So this French law applies to all companies operating in France that employ more than 5,000 employees. That's in metropolitan France, or 10,000 workers worldwide. Yes, it's all good in paper, but in practice, this law may not always work, or it may not work for all spheres, meaning that the threshold of having 5,000 workers in France or 10,000 workers employed by the company worldwide, this is a very, very high threshold. Thus, this constitutes one of the limits of the law. In fact, unfortunately, The sectors with high labor intensity, including the fast fashion industry, textile and garment industry, they get excluded from the coverage of this law. Now let's move on to the United Kingdom. So in the United Kingdom, in 2016, the UK adopted the Transparency in the Supply Chain Clause of the Modern Slavery Act. And this provision obliges companies domiciled or doing business in the UK to report on the steps they take to prevent slavery or human rights trafficking in their supply chains. So as you can see, it's the same story as with the French law, meaning that it only covers specific issues such as, slavery, human trafficking, very specific, and it leaves out other areas. For example, as I said, paying, exploiting workers to pay, to get more work done and paying them as little as they can, because, that's how the fast fashion industry operates today. The next country on my list is the Netherlands. In February 2017, the Dutch parliament adopted the Child Labor Due Diligence Bill, and this law, if approved by the Dutch Senate, would oblige companies to determine whether child labor is present in their global value supply chains, and if so, develop an action plan to combat it. So as you can see, it's also about a specific area of workers' rights. It's about child labor. Now, let's talk about Sweden. You know that Sweden is the country of H&M and IKEA, right? So now it turns out that there's a massive petition taking place in Sweden for now at the level of NGOs and civil society that calls for legislation that requires companies to respect human rights in their own operations and in their business relations, and for the Swedish government to actively work for an effective regulatory framework on the EU level. Legislation based on the UN guidelines principle on business and human rights could be integrated into Swedish law. It is yet to be seen where they will be coming with this, where we'll be going with this. The time will have to tell us if they will succeed or not, and how it will actually play out in terms of, seeing the responsibility of such giants as H&M, IKEA, and others. The next is European Union. So the European Union seeks to develop due diligence legislation, and the European Commission has committed within the framework of the European Green Deal to bring together all EU actions and policies to help achieve a successful and just transition towards a sustainable future. So as you can see, at the level of the EU, not much has been done other than, the commitment, other than, calls for from EU addressed to companies. However, nothing is officialized in terms of a regulation or law at the EU level, so that individual states like France, Netherlands, as we have seen, they have advanced, and on their national level they have done more than what the EU has done at its regional level. Last but not least, let's talk about the USA. So corporate social responsibility in the USA is a form of a soft law. It is not required by US statute or regulations, i.e. it is not required by hard law, obligatory law. But it is nonetheless as seen as obligatory by most corporations because of consumer expectations and internal norms. Unfortunately, none of the above-mentioned developments in these countries that I mentioned, none of them apply to issues that garment workers of the fast fashion industry are experiencing. They apply to issues like child labor, forced labor, and things like that, of the similar nature, but not to the underlying number one issues in the fast fashion industry. Child labor and forced labor in the supply chains of fast fashion brands. This is a problem too, and we heard of it. We still hear practices of, exploiting children and using forced labor, and this is very bad. And we should keep on addressing this, but it is not a number one problem. And an average consumer of the fast fashion, she knows that it is other problems that come that are on the agenda. Because no global brand openly or covertly engages in child labor or forced labor, neither do their foreign partner companies. But today, as we have seen, everybody, including advanced countries, is paying their undivided 100% attention to cases like human rights violations, forced labor, child labor, etc. Because in 99% of the cases, workers are complaining about the lowest salaries and worse conditions at work. That being said, it is going to take years for the above-mentioned workers' rights to be reflected in national legislations of countries of origin of fashion brands. And why is this important? Why am I stressing out this topic? Because their national legislations regulate their activities and can bring more tangible changes to context of their home corporations. Thank you for watching. For videos on fast fashion and sustainable development, join me every Sunday by 10 a.m. CET, and also don't forget to leave a comment down below, smash the like button, and I'll see you next Sunday. Thank you for your attention. Bye.